Well, good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be here and share the Dharma with everyone as usual. And a beautiful day, at least here in New York. I know people can be in many other places. And as I'd like to thank, of course, our founder, Shifu, Master Sheng Yen, and all of the Foshers and all the people that make this possible. And all sentient beings everywhere. And I'm waving at you, and hopefully you're waving back at me. So now I'm going to continue my series on Lojong. Now I began this in my earlier talk, where I introduced the whole schema of the teachings, and I explained a little bit about why I was doing this, which I'm actually going to go over again today, because I think it's very important. As I mentioned, I've been practicing for a long time, and I started to feel that my practice had a certain degree of selfishness to it. I was really self-involved, even though it's not so apparent. You know, you feel like you're really practicing, but then there are things that you start avoiding. You start to put on kind of blinders as you practice, and you can get into a groove, or it could be a ghost cave, and you're not so aware of it. So I was first attracted to a book by Norm Fisher called Training in Compassion, and that's where I was introduced to these Lojong slogans. There are 59 of them, divided into seven points, 7 key points, and they are ways of integrating our everyday life into the absolute aspect of the practice, and integrating the absolute aspect of the practice into our everyday life. That's really what attracted me. And I think that now, you know, in these modern times, people have lives that are much more complicated than they've ever been. So to climb out of the thicket of views, that was the phrase that the Buddha used, which explains how we live in our heads. We live with our illusions, fabrications, right? And this is, you know, our ordinary samsaric minds. So I think we need a variety of approaches, and I'm offering these teachings as ways that we can hold a mirror up to ourselves, if you like, with our Chan teachings. There's no, as far as I'm concerned, there's no real variation. These are just different ways of looking at the same thing. And sometimes when you do that, when you hear the same teaching put in a slightly different way at a slightly different time, you know, light might go off in your head or someplace, so that it starts to become more meaningful to you. So these practices, Lojong, once again in Tibetan, means training of the mind. And these teachings derive ultimately from Atisha in the 10th century, but they were formulated in the form that we have them today in the 12th century by Chikawa Yeshe Dorje, who began in the Nyingma tradition, and then went to the Kadampa in the Tibetan lineage. And he was dealing with a lot of lepers. There was a lot of disease in Tibet in that time, and these teachings were very helpful. I'm not saying that they're healing in that way, but people were healing their minds for sure. And even his brother, who was really dead sense against anything in the Dharma, started to listen to the teachings, and he benefited as well. So it's really applicable to almost everyone. And what these teachings can help us do, as what Chan helps us do, is to awaken our hearts, right? The teachings are very much about living in the real world and integrating the practice. And we have this assumption, of course, in Chan, we often talk about Buddha nature. And here what we're going to be talking about is bodhicitta. which is also part of Chan, but we don't hear it quite as much in the same way. And so I'm going to spend first a fair amount of time on just going over bodhicitta, because it's a term which can't really be translated. We can look at it from different angles and start to get a sense of it, but it doesn't really render itself to a definition in the same way the Buddha nature doesn't really lend itself to a definition. I mean, what do we say about Buddha nature? We have it, we express it, it's part of us, we're part of it. I mean, we can go on and never really find the words that are going to capture it because it's not capturable. So with our training in Chan and however we come to the Dharma, it's about being where we are and not withdrawing from life. And it's about being more honest with ourselves and other people. It's about working with and within the obstacles that we encounter. That's a very important part of Lojong. And one thing that we can stop doing, which is a very prevalent habit, is blaming ourselves, blaming others, criticizing ourselves and others, and ignoring what needs to be done. So these teachings help us work with craving and denial. And that can bring about a change in us. And when we change, to some extent, the world changes. And not the way that we would like the world to change, of course, but we can work on ourselves. So in Chan, we're more used to hearing things like in Yongjia's Song of Enlightenment, have you not seen the idle man of Tao who has nothing to learn and nothing to do? What sometimes is hard to see is in that the compassion that is in those teachings, that the non-attachment, which is really so deeply involved in our practice. And as I said in my last talk, I mean, Master Sheng Yen was the most compassionate person I ever met in my life. And he was just really remarkable. And the consideration he showed me and how much he helped me is also inexpressible. So I'm always trying to pay back and trying to emulate in my small way what Master Sheng Yen showed me. So one of the things I want to talk about now is where bodhicitta lies kind of in the Chan framework. So it's found more prevalently stated in this way of bodhicitta. Bodhi, of course, meaning awakened, citta, mind. And the interesting thing about the term is it sounds like it's a state of mind or being, but it's also a practice. It's a beginning and end, and it's has no beginning and has no end. So it's a deep expression of enlightenment, of awakening. So in the Avatamsaka Sutra, in chapter 31, the Tibetan version 26 in Chinese, it says that bodhisattvas, and when we're talking about bodhisattvas here, we're talking about really committed bodhisattvas who have made great vows to enlightenment. So bodhisattvas are free from acquisitiveness and craving, and they always delight in bodhicitta. And then this is in the chapter on the 10 stages, right, of the 10 bhumis of towards enlightenment, towards Buddhahood. And in the 5th bhumi, which is called difficult to conquer, it says that the bodhisattva's mind is unimpeded because he wanders through the world furnished with the union of bodhicitta and great skillful methods. And he rejects all other thoughts day and night because he is dedicated to ripening all things. Now, when I speak about bhumis, I'm very aware of the fact that I haven't really reached a bhumi. You know, I have reached a bloomy, which is the word for Bloomingdale's. I have shopped in Bloomingdale's. That I can attest to. Anything else is questionable. So another quote from the Avatamsaka Sutra is, in order to make offerings to all of the jinas and others, the Buddhas, in the 3 times, they purify all realms throughout the extent of space by comprehending the sameness of all phenomena. Bodhicitta is developed for the sake of the liberation of beings. And in the Brahmacharya chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra, it says, at the time of the initial aspiration for enlightenment, complete perfect enlightenment is already achieved. So there's no compunction for practicing for an infinite amount of time. And of course, we find this in the teachings of Dogen Zenji. Of course, he's always talking about, even for a beginner, he uses the word practice enlightenment. When you sit in zazen, in meditation, dazhua in Chinese, you are the Buddha mudra, and that is something that is throughout the universe. It's a really remarkable part of Dogen's teachings. And then it also says in the Avatamsaka Sutra that the Bodhisattva continuously remembers bodhicitta. So that brings us to another aspect of where you can see this in some of the sutras that we might be familiar with. So in the Lotus Sutra, in chapter 2, Sariputra is reminded by the Buddha that he has this essential nature of mind, and he's forgotten. This is a theme that applies to all of us, that we have this real Buddha nature, we have this inherent enlightenment, but we've forgotten. It has been overlaid, as Guagu would say, by all of our vexations, our habitual tendencies. And Rebecca Lee also uses this word of modes of habituation. It could be desire, could be the needing to fix things, intellectualizing. There are all sorts of ways that we fall into particular kinds of traps. So the Buddha is reminding Sariputra about who he is, right? And then, of course, in the 8th chapter of the Lotus Sutra, there's a parable of a man who is drunk, and his friend, who is really the Buddha in disguise, sews a jewel in his robe. But the man, when he wakes, doesn't know this and wanders enduring great suffering. And when he finally encounters the man again, the man says, "What was your problem? You had this in your robe all the time. You didn't have to suffer like that." And so that jewel is bodhicitta in many ways. Also, in another way of looking at bodhicitta, there's an understanding of what's called bodhicitta pada, the way towards bodhicitta, and that's shown in the awakening of faith, and that is understood to derive from faith, understanding and practice, and realization. So there's a path that is bodhicitta. And there's also the Bodhisattva Bhumi, which shows 4 conditions for generating bodhicitta. That's witnessing an inconceivable miracle performed by the Buddha or a Bodhisattva, listening to the teachings on enlightenment, realizing your potential for the Dharma, and that your vexations can be extinguished, and just wanting to help all sentient beings. There's also a work called the Fa Puti Shinlun, which I haven't read, but I've read about this, where the 4 qualities or conditions for giving rise to bodhicitta are reflecting on the Buddhas, contemplating the dangers inherent in the body, developing compassion towards sentient beings, and seeking the supreme result, which I'm assuming is Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. And then in Shantideva's Bodhicaryavatara, the way of the Bodhisattva, he says that we can recognize ourselves and our need for happiness, and see that others want the same thing. We can open our awareness to that. And he says that by cherishing others more than ourselves, we ensure the welfare of ourselves by becoming a Buddha, and others by teaching them the Dharma. So I thought I would just include this part of just talking about bodhicitta itself with a quote from the Bardo Todal, which is the Tibetan Book of the Dead. These are wonderful verses telling us who we really are. So it says, "O nobly born," that's you and me, right? "O nobly born, you who are the son or daughter of the Buddha, remember who you are in these times of change. Remember the Buddha who has taken birth in your own form. Step out of the small self, out of the body of fear, and rest in generosity and kindness of heart. Rest in your own true virtue and wisdom. Rest in the graciousness of patience, the dedication and equanimity and compassion you share with all life. That is who you really are. Trust it. Rest in your own true nature." So just a little bit more about how we can get confused about bodhicitta, right? Which I think is important to talk about. So there are words that we associate with it, like compassion, altruism, empathy, activism, and I know that years ago, actually, I was here at the Chan Center, and I gave a talk about compassion, and my title of it was, "I don't understand what compassion was." I was being very honest. And what I was exploring was how I would read about it in other literature, and I really wasn't feeling it. And that's what I thought compassion was. I thought it was a kind of feeling, something you're supposed to, like a buzz you're supposed to get, which could be pity or sympathy or whatever, and which is not what compassion is. It's understood in many of our traditions as being one and the same as wisdom. It's an opening of the heart and the mind. It's not a closing down and centering on some feeling, and it's not dwelling in guilt or shame. That's not what compassion is. Because a lot of us are afraid of our emotions, and we can feel inadequate, right? And wonder why when we act, that our actions are not resulting in the efficacy that we wanted. We get caught up in fantasizing, which is really about our own egos, about thinking that, well, I'm doing this, so it should end up the way that I want it to be. And we're just not looking at causes and conditions and the entire world that is around us. And since the world doesn't really revolve around us, even though most of us think it does. So, there was just one other thing I had a note about the Vairakana Bisam Bodhi Sutra, where Vairakana, who is the central Buddha in the 5 Buddha families, talks about how his cause, root, and culmination of his own omniscience came from bodhicitta, karuna, and compassion. So a lot of these terms that we hear and we can throw around, sometimes knowing what they mean and sometimes not, they're all very much connected. And they're really meant to be pointers to let us turn the mirror around, look inside, see what it is that we're holding on to or not holding on to. Okay, so one of the things I'm doing in this talk is I am using the teachings of a number of teachers besides Master Sheng Yen and all of our Chan lineage, but just to mention their names because it's inherent in what I'm talking about. There is Norman Fisher, who is a Zen teacher. in the Japanese tradition, American. Then there's Pema Chodron, Kyabang Traleg, Kentrel Lodro Taye, and Ken MacLeod, who was an American who was trained in the Tibetan tradition. So first, I'm going to summarize some of the things that Pema Chodron says about bodhicitta and the Lojong practice, which all of this is, I find, is really helpful and really essential because I know I'm giving a talk and I'm giving up a lot of concepts or whatever, but the practice is really our lives, and there's certain things like bodhicitta. I think you can't. Well, obviously, you can talk too much about them, right? But you can't dispense with them. Really, they're really so essential. So that's why I'm going into it a little bit further. So Pema talks about how this bodhicitta opens up a soft spot in our heart, and she talks about how this is a universal kind of thing, even among animals who love their offspring. And as Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche said, everybody loves something, even if it's only tortillas. So that's a very low bar. All you have to do is love something. It could be Krispy Kreme donuts or something that, somewhere there's that spark inside you. And she also says that an analogy for bodhicitta is the rawness of a broken heart. And that can give birth to anxiety and panic and sometimes anger, resentment, and blame. But we can see that under this, the hardness and the implacability of these kind of emotions, there's a tenderness which is related to genuine sadness. And this can be our link with other people who are suffering. So we see that we're not alone. And Rumi, the Persian poet, said, "Your heart breaks until it opens." And bodhicitta is with us throughout. So, and then just to finish this up, this is with a quote from Shunryu Suzuki. And he says, "Our teaching is just to live, always in reality in its exact sense. To make our effort, moment after moment, is our way. In an exact sense, the only thing we can actually study in life is that on which we are working in each moment." That's worth pausing about. With all of the concepts and all of the taught and all of the teachings, which are as deep and numerous as the ocean, where we're actually living at any given time is in the present moment. That's where the teachings on our lives are really unfolding. So we cannot even study the Buddha's words, Suzuki says. To study Buddha's words in the exact sense means to study them through some activity which you face moment after moment, and then the words evaporate. Now I'm going to move to some of the things that Ken MacLeod talks about when points out in speaking about bodhicitta. Basically, there are three types of it, and that's important to know, once again, not to have another classification, but to understand that bodhicitta is a process. The whole teaching is a process, an unfolding, and we are at one point or another in our particular journey, and it's really important to be gentle with ourselves, so we don't beat ourselves up because there's some particular goal, which is a particular thing in our mind, which we are just holding on to and which is making us miserable. So we can understand the first aspect of compassion is just a wish that others not suffer, and that can arise in different ways. That's a very straightforward simple feeling when we see others struggling and also we see ourselves struggling. We just want them to be at peace. We want to be at peace. And many people who have embarked on the teaching, admit that in the beginning, their problems are so difficult that they really can't deal with anything else but their own problems. And that's very natural. And of course, what we see going on in the world, people are in all sorts of conditions of extreme suffering to extreme non-suffering, but even in our country, one of the richest countries in the world, there is a great deal of tension and anxiety, right? So the second aspect of compassion is when we've come to terms with an aspect of life that everyone finds difficult, aging and mortality, for instance. So in coming to terms with our own mortality, we see that we're all in the same boat, so to speak. And again, we naturally feel compassion for others struggling with the same issue. So in this second aspect of compassion, there's kind of a widening out, being more aware, more concerned with what's going on with other people. And then compassion arises in a third way when we come to know experientially that the sense of I, the one that we hold so dear, me, mine, mine, is simply a movement of mind. There's really nothing there. Then at that point, we see that others are not different from us and their struggles are no different from ours. There are some metaphors for this. I don't know how helpful they'll be. I'll just mention them in passing. One is kind of the king, where you are, you realize through your own power, virtue, and understanding that you can help people, but they're really quite separate. And then there is the boatman, where everyone's on the same boat with you, and you've opened up to that reality. And the last one is the shepherd. So now you've devoted your life to putting everyone before you, and you have just this intention to guide others, and have that sense of peace and the understanding of freedom. And there's very, very little concern for oneself. And I guess at a certain point, you really don't have any kind of preoccupation for yourself. And it's a total expression of being in the world with no separation between self and others. And this, of course, is what we find in the Diamond Sutra, when the Buddha says to help all beings, no matter what their antecedents, but to not concentrate on their identity as a being of some sort, of having a lifespan and seeing no separation, and not actually even getting into the idea of that you are helping someone else. That's one of the many things that the Diamond Sutra teaches us. So now, one thing I want to say, which I think is going to be very interesting for a lot of us Chan practitioners, is Ken MacLeod goes over the 4 vows, the 4 great vows, which we say every day, and sometimes more. And the Korean monk Wan Ho said that these 4 noble truths are the essence of bodhicitta pada. They're the direct path of bodhicitta. And Norm Fisher points out how somebody in the Zen tradition can say the 4 great vows for decades and have no idea that it has anything to do with compassion, let alone bodhicitta. So first, I'm going to read the 4 vows in the way that it's used in his tradition, and you'll find some very interesting differences. So, beings are numberless, may I free them all. We say, I vow to save innumerable sentient beings. That's pretty much identical. The second one is reactions are endless, may I release them all. That's a change, right? I mean, slightly. We talk about vexations. Here it's talking about reactions and the reactivity of the mind, which is essentially where we get off on the wrong foot when we are in various situations. And the idea of releasing a reaction is really interesting. It's taking responsibility that we are the ones who actually enacted it, who fabricated the reaction to begin with. The third great vow is doors to experience are infinite. May I enter them all. So this is an idea of like integrating with all kinds of experience. And actually, I'm going to go over what MacLeod says in detail, and you'll see how he works with that nuance. Now, the last one is the most surprising of all to me. I had never heard this. This is the fourth great vow. Ways of awakening are limitless. I know them all. So we say, I vow to attain supreme Buddhahood. There's no mention of Buddha in this last great vow, which gave me pause, right? And, you know, it made me think, you know, in Genjo Koan by Dogen Zenji, he talks about how Buddhas don't know that they're Buddhas, but they actualize Buddhahood. Now that's a pretty dense expression, but I think it points out the fact, which I think is a fact, that Buddhas don't go around saying, hello, I'm a Buddha, you know, please, I'll give you my autograph if you ask for it. It's really about the entirety of the awakening process, which I think we don't really understand, not the way a Buddha does. And it's kind of acknowledging that. So, so now I'll go over those in a little bit more detail, the way that Ken MacLeod goes over them. So beings are numberless, I vow, may I free them all. So this speaks to a heartfelt wish that others not suffer. It is conceived in an inconceivable way, but this is a way of orienting the mind towards bodhicitta. As MacLeod puts it, if you have this kind of vow, wish or intention in your mind, and that causes a shift in the way you live your life, that's the start of bodhicitta, kind of the Dharma intervening in your life. Number two, reactions are endless. May I release them all. Because of our vexations, conditioning, and habitual tendencies, we can't really act on the first great vow. So we try to have an attitude of acceptance and non-attachment that will help us navigate negative conditions. We can't make them go away with the snap of our fingers, but we can approach them with wisdom and see their inherent emptiness and foresee the harm that attachment can cause. Then, as the texts say, emotional reactions arise and subside on their own, like clouds in the sky. The main point is that with the commitment of bodhicitta, we no longer have the luxury of indulging in our own confusion and reactivity. You know, Pema Chodron talks about nostalgia for samsara. That's a pretty wild term, right? You know, so we kind of fall in love with our vexations, obviously unconsciously. So life may actually seem to be more difficult, but that's an indication that we are awakening to a reality that we don't have to be controlled by, but we do have to deal with responsibly. The third great vow, doors to experience are infinite. May I enter them all. So he's talking about the line in Japanese and in Chinese, of course. There's a double entendre to famen, right? So it means, well, obviously it means doors to the Dharma, but it can mean doors to experience. And that's what this particular way of phrasing it is pointing to. So the Buddha begins his response with this question. Actually, what he's referring to is the Diamond Sutra, which I mentioned, and how that is that's a reaction to this idea of opening into experience, all experiences, and not labeling them, and knowing that no one is being freed. So we had no idea that we were capable of feeling such far-reaching care and compassion while experiencing such depth of peace and presence. And then he talks about Shanti Deva's work, which I mentioned earlier, the awakening mind on the Bodhisattva path, and he says it's small wonder that we feel when we've discovered something so profound and ultimate and absolutely true, that it is a source of awakening. And the irony, he points out, is that every emotional reaction is also a door to this way of experiencing life. That is really an utterly profound observation and practice, and that we'll see when we start to get into the relative bodhisattva. There's one of the slogans, number 12, says to drive all blames into one. And this is another way of taking responsibility for the reactive mind. And then finally, the fourth great vow, ways of awakening are limitless. May I know them all. So he talks about a Tibetan teacher, MacLeod talks about the teacher Longchenpa, who sees the awakening mind as the basis of life, the basis of all experience. It's unrestricted, arising as anything whatsoever. Its natural clarity shines in the vastness of pure experience. There's nothing whatsoever to identify. It is just the way of unfettered awareness carrying itself. And Longchenpa presents the awakening mind as the constant unfolding of awareness or experience in an unconceivable vastness that can only be described as unrestricted, empty clarity. This is a deep mystical knowing, and at this point, there is virtually nothing left of us. We are free in natural responsiveness. So I thought that was an interesting thing to present, the four great vows, which many of us who practice for so many years are quite familiar with, but I think it's helpful to look at them from another point of view. And there's an article in Lion's Roar or actually this is from Tricycle, where you can read the whole article from Ken MacLeod. So now we get to absolute bodhicitta and the slogans in the Lojong. So these are the slogans. They are 2 through 6, and I'm just going to recite them quickly, which are, the first is see everything as a dream. That's number 2. The third is to examine unborn awareness. The fourth is to let the antidote fade away by itself, or as Norman Fisher says, don't get caught in peace. The next is to rest into unborn, rest into the ground of being, rest in the Alaya consciousness. And the last one is off the cushion, be a child of illusion. Those are the slogans. That's what I'm going to do for the remainder of the talk. Go into them in some detail. One thing that's really interesting is this is the section on absolute bodhicitta. But as you can see, since I just went over the 5 slogans that are involved with absolute bodhicitta, the word bodhicitta is not mentioned, right? So Atisha or Chikawa could have just said, develop bodhicitta, and you didn't have to go into these 5 slogans. But as you can see, it's it's really multi-determined, hard to define, and extends everywhere. So this way of breaking things down is really very helpful. All right, so I'm going to spend a little time on number 2, which is see everything as a dream. Now, as you probably know, there are many teachers that talk about the samsaric world as a dream, talk about waking from the dream. I wouldn't dispute that really, but I've always had a little bit of a problem with it because I think it's more nuanced that we're just living in a dream. And I'm going to give some examples to show why I think that. For one thing, if you teach somebody a meditation method, teach them how to follow their breath. One thing that almost everyone experiences who is going to continue is that they sit down, they try to count to 10 following their breath, and they can't believe how many thoughts crowd their mind. So when they get up from doing that method, they know that the method has ended and they've learned something about their mind. They may not be that aware that what they've learned about their mind is continuing, whether they're meditating or not, but they've had a glimpse of something. Whereas if you tell somebody that they're dreaming, and in meditation, when they get, how do you say to them, all right, stop dreaming, right? It's a little too pat. And then, of course, they could dream that they've stopped dreaming. And oftentimes it's described that we're a dream, dreaming that we're a dream. So another way of looking at a dream is how personal dreams are. Remember, dreams have many different understands in English, and I'm sure in other languages too. So, for example, if I'm dreaming that I'm on Fifth Avenue and I'm being chased by a herd of hippopotamuses that are carrying vanilla cream donuts, right? Happens all the time, right? If I'm dreaming that, I don't meet a friend who will say to me, oh, Harry, they weren't hippopotamuses, they were rhinoceroses, and it wasn't vanilla cream, it was chocolate cream donuts, right? That's ridiculous. So the dream is really a very private thing that is not shared by other people. And then on the other hand, if you are dreaming that you're flying in outer space, visiting another civilization, meeting all sorts of different people and creatures, where your normal everyday world has disappeared. When you wake up, that world is the world that you were in is still very much the way that you left it when you were dreaming. Now, once again, if you really drill down very subtly, the world is never the same. Even this world that we're all in right now, it's subtly changing moment by moment. We don't notice those kind of changes unless something abrupt or catastrophic happens, when everything that we are experiencing can be swept away because there's really no sustainability to life. So if we follow this Lojong slogan, we have to see what it's really telling us when it says, see everything as a dream. I had good fortune to hear a Rinpoche, Tengyur Rinpoche, speak not that long ago, just a month or so, and there was a question and answer period. So I asked him about this particular slogan, see everything as a dream. I mean, what does it mean? How are we supposed to understand this? So he said that in Tibetan, the word for dream is really a word that means like a magic show. And the idea is that what we're encountering, not only is it that it's an illusion, but it's impermanent. And that's really the key part of it, that whatever we're encountering, which we really feel is quite real. And that's one of issues, right? As Sakni Rinpoche often says, you think that you're real. That's actually quite true. The problem is you think you're really real, and that's where all your problems arise. So see everything as a dream is to become aware of this continual change, and also to not get caught up in seeing the change as simply negative, like, oh, this is going to take away my possessions, it's going to take away my health, right? I'm going to grow older and older and eventually die. But it's also recognizing the truth of the change, that positive things can happen, and also that it is reality itself. And to work on this as a practitioner, you work with change. It's not meant to be an impediment. So that's seeing everything as a dream. And also, just in Western terms, there's a great quote from Mark Twain who says, you can't depend on your eyes if your imagination is out of focus, right? So I think that statement almost could have come from the Buddha, right? So when things come in through our eyes, we only have 6 senses, right? There's, what we see and what is seen, what we hear, and our hearing, on and on through all of the senses. That is what comprises our world. But in one school of Buddhism, like Yogacara, there are 51 states of mind, or different things that can arise between the simplest of things, what comes in through the sense and what's experienced in the mind. It's very direct, but we don't experience the world with that directness. We embellish it and distort it and attach to things in so many different ways. So that, actually, just to sum up the see everything as a dream, Pema Chodron sums this up very well. It's just lighten up, right? We don't have to take everything so seriously. It's just it can be understood on pretty simple terms. Now let's look at the next one in absolute bodhicitta. Examine the nature of awareness, or the fundamental nature of the unborn mind. So in the first one, in seeing everything as a dream, we're kind of looking out at the world, in ourselves to some extent, and just noticing how we're reacting to it and what the possibilities are for our reaction. We don't have to be a prisoner to our reaction. On the other hand, then there's the question of, like, who is doing all this? Who is being aware? What's the nature of that awareness? Can it be constricted? Can it be expanded? This is the question of, who am I? Who's this is kind of very much like one of our many Watos. Who's dragging this corpse around? Who's reciting the Buddha's name? It's really looking into that. And where did this sense of I come from? What are its parameters? How is it entering our lives? Is it being helpful, or is it causing harm? And so this question points directly to the question of self and intentionality, right? What are we trying to do? What do we think we're trying to do? And then, of course, using this slogan. And one thing, I said this last time, but I should mention it. The slogans, of course, are teachings. They're opening our awareness to certain things, but they can also be used as practices. And there's some people who work on these slogans for years, just picking one, like you'd pick a Wato. So we see there's nothing that can really be designated as self anywhere in our 5 skandhas. So, and one thing that's also helpful in using this slogan is you can become more aware of how your emotions are arising in your mind. Because if you're looking at unborn awareness, then where are these things? Where is this anger coming from? Where is the jealousy? Where is the confusion coming from? So it's another way of, a lot of what the practice is for me is almost like in chemistry, when you use dye or in biology to put on a slide, so that all of a sudden you're looking at, let's say, a one-celled organism or something, and you want to see the structures within the cell. The dye actually highlights what it is you're looking at. And so some of these very deep methods can help us become much more aware of the kind of things that generally are like wallpaper to us. They're in the background. We don't question them. So go to the next slogan, which is even the remedy naturally subsides on its own, or as Norm Fisher says it, don't get stuck on peace. So what happens, of course, in our practice, let's say we see that everything is a dream, we use this and we start to see, wow, I'm being freed up. I'm not so caught up in the world. Wow, I'm really such a great practitioner. This is what an accomplishment. And all of a sudden, I'm grasping on to what I've accomplished, or I can say I'm so unattached. It's I'm just doing so well. So this remedy has helped me. The same thing with examining unborn awareness. I'm becoming aware of the sense of self. I'm becoming aware of the emotions. I'm feeling much freer. And then this feels so good, this release, that then I start to attach to that. And this is really a natural process, right? Very hard to avoid this. I remember Joseph Goldstein once talking about how he spent years trying to get back to a really wonderful experience he had. He said that he spent about 2 years doing this, and of course, he couldn't do it. These things are often just, like I said, wallpaper, really hard to see. So there's this wonderful story of a Zen master who brings his 3 young monks to a hut in the woods where a storm is impending, and he says to them, don't move and don't say anything. And they're sitting there quietly practicing, and all of a sudden the storm revs up and a window is blown out. And so the first little monk says, what was that? And then the second monk says, the master said we weren't supposed to say anything. And then the third monk said, well, I'm glad I didn't say anything. So it's very easy to just miss what you're actually doing and to mischaracterize how you're reacting to the world. So this third slogan is really very helpful. And it means to be really vigilant about what you're doing, to see when you're holding on to things, and enjoy things when you can enjoy them, and try to enjoy things when they don't go well, and try not to get attached to them when they are going well, but to live as freely as you can. Now, Pema Chodron, this is her technique. She talks about labeling things as thinking or feeling or whatever, which really can be very helpful in the beginning, but once again, you can get caught on the labels. And then just to quote Jamgon Kongtrul, a great Tibetan master, he says, when we look at the presence of the remedy itself, these thoughts about the absence of true existence, there is nothing for the mind to refer to, and they subside naturally on their own. So this is another very helpful slogan, another helpful thing to keep in mind in practice, whatever tradition you're in. Then the next one is called rest in the natural state, the basis of all. And this is something that's very familiar to us in Chan or Zen. So this is meditation, which is not thinking. This is trusting the body and the mind and nothing more. Or as Dogen Zenji says, body and mind drop off. And also another phrase very familiar from Dogen is to think non-thinking. It's being in the natural state like this. Kentrol Taye says that this is a non-investigative part of the practice, where you are simply resting. You're aware, but you're not quite making the effort. And this is what has been described to me as the one stage in Watto practice, where you're watching the Watto, where it's a contemplation, where you're at a very, very high level of practice. And this is also, this resting the mind is really the essence of silent illumination, in my opinion, where you are being in the moment and not imposing your vexations on what's happening. Because as Rebecca Lee says in her book, an illumination is that the present moment plus vexations equals suffering. So really having this open mind, which is expansive and silent, is really what this particular slogan is talking about. And so this basic consciousness is the storehouse of all our delusory experiences. That's what we're really looking at. We're looking at the alaya consciousness for people who are into Yogacara, or the Amala consciousness, which is kind of the alaya consciousness with no defilements in it. This is looking at everything that is mind itself, where the label mind makes no sense at that point. And actually, there's a really interesting teaching I learned from Uchiyama Roshi, where, because when we talk about mind in Chan, it's very difficult. Sometimes we say mind, sometimes we say no mind. But what he suggests is that we use the word life, right? I mean, if we're living, mind and body are around somewhere, and you don't have to get caught up in mind or no mind. It's just life. And so there's a quote from Milarepa, who said, I realized this when I understood that in general, all things relate to samsara and nirvana, and they're all interdependent. So, and he said, furthermore, I perceive the source consciousness is neutral, right? There's no good or bad, no right or wrong, right? Nothing to hold on to, nothing to push away. Samsara is the result of wrong view, the wrong point of view. Nirvana is realized through perfect awareness. And he said, I perceive that the essence of both lay in an empty and luminous awareness. And that is what this fifth slogan is talking about. And let me see. There's so much more that I can say about these things. That nothing is wasted. There's nothing to hold on. Nothing is wasted. Everything, every moment, everything we encounter really has a perceivable experience, something we can experience without holding on to. And so this mind that grasps, even this grasping mind, is not located anywhere externally or internally. And that's certainly something for investigation. And also what this is epitomized by in Chan is really the don't know mind. Every moment is fresh. When you come to a realization, Master Sheng Yen used to say, as these things would arise in his mind, he would say, this is not my destination. This is not my destination. So we're urged in Chan, to keep looking, keep looking. until eventually, I guess, there's no one looking. And then now the last of the slogans, which is really pretty fascinating and really important, because if you think about it, we sit, if we're lay people especially, sometimes we don't have time to meditate. Sometimes we maintain a practice of a half an hour, sometimes 2 hours a day, but most of the day, 90% of the day, we're not sitting on a cushion. So this last slogan, it says post-meditation, in other words, when you're off the cushion, be a child of illusion. So Pema Chodron describes this as like a fresh take on the moment, about the essence of non-attachment. Kabgan Tralag says, the way to elevate and liberate ourselves on the spiritual path is by maintaining the perspective of the insubstantial nature of things in our everyday activities, right? I remember there was a commercial for orange juice many years ago. It used to say, it's not just for breakfast anymore, right? The orange juice companies were trying to get you to drink orange juice for lunch or for dinner, which just seemed blasphemous, right? So they were trying to change us. Like there's also that expression, I could have had a V8, instead of drinking a Coke. So, our awareness, our practice is not just for breakfast. It's not just for being on the cushion. It's for all times. And, you can really look at your practice like you're doing exercise. Like I went to the gym, I worked out, all right, I'm finished. That's it. I did look at these mighty biceps, right? And it just goes right out of your mind. So this is a heads up to show us that, we really can't or shouldn't or might not distinguish between what we think is formal meditation and what we think is everything else. And, we can really then watch what's going on in everyday life in a much lighter way and see the negative emotions arising and not get so attached to them. And so the Lojong masters warn us about how easy it is to allow our more universal feelings of benevolence, which is what we're talking about, this bodhicitta, but it can slide into personal narratives of self-pity and hopelessness, resentment and anger. Once again, so to guard against these illusions, and these are, I think, are very real issues in our practice. They advise us, as I said, to lighten up, not take things too seriously, and maintain a balance between our feelings for others and our self-involved, our self-absorbed involvements in everyday life. Living in the world for most of us is kind of a balancing act. I mean, I think it's important to be very clear about that, even though we can wish, especially if we have a really good meditation session or we come back from a retreat, we really kind of wish that we could hold this beautiful, balanced, peaceful state of mind, no matter what happens. And it really does affect our lives in so many ways, but it's not going to be something that we can command. And that's something I think that's really, really important to say and to point out. So, once again, there's a lot of material here, but I think I've covered everything. Just to sum up, I talked about the absolute bodhicitta section of the Lojong, the sections 2 through 6, that's 5 slogans, and I introduced it by showing how multifaceted and deep and profound bodhicitta is, this bodhicitta being our essential nature, which we have fallen asleep upon. It's resting there within us. We're trying to look at it. We're trying to wake up and see it. And I went through the slogans once again, which are to see everything as a dream, to examine unborn awareness, to not get caught up in the antidote or the peace, the lovely feelings, and to rest in the natural state of mind, the ground of being, and finally off the cushion to be a child of illusion. That is the section of absolute bodhicitta, which is the gateway to relative bodhicitta. And of course, as we'll learn, just like we understand about the absolute and the relative, that they're two sides of the same coin. They're not really distinguishable for a fully enlightened being. For us, we really only know about the relative world, but the relative world couldn't exist without the absolute. So that's something that we'll see next time. So I'm just going to close with a quote from the Japanese master Bankei Yotaku, who said, "So whatever anyone else may do, whatever happens, leave things as they are. Don't worry yourself over them. Don't take your own side. Just dwell in your Buddha mind as it is and do not change it into other things. If you do that, illusion can never occur. You will pass the day constantly in the unborn Buddha mind. Then, that very day, are you not a living Buddha? Yes, you are firmly established as a living Buddha, and that is a matter of inestimable worth." So, thank you. Thank all of you Buddhas for listening. So, still here in my physical body. I haven't dropped off body and mind quite yet. I had, in my bag, I left my chief disciple, who usually listens. Did you hear everything I said? Mm-hmm. And did you agree? Mm-hmm. So, once again, much as I think I might have delivered, the Dharma in a pure, essential way, certain people, non-sentient beings don't necessarily agree. So you can incorporate this as best you can. This is always a matter for deep investigation, continued practice. We're always not resting in our activities. And anyway, so that's it. If there are any questions, I'm happy to try and see what I can come up with. So, oh, okay, we have a question.
Hi, Eric. It's Echo.
Oh, hey, Echo. Hi.
I thought the first one and the sixth one seems interesting. The first is see everything as a dream.
Right.
The sixth one is after meditation, be a child of illusion. It seems tied very well together, these two. And in between, basically talking about being with the Buddha nature. So I just thought maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, no, that's a good observation. Thank you, Echo. Appreciate that. I think, what you see in all 59 slogans, which we certainly haven't gotten to, is there's a certain understanding that they're all the same, that they're all coming from this absolute bodhicitta. So in the first one, see everything as a dream, you're really dealing with, I think this is on the cushion kind of things, as like a practice that you are adopting kind of consciously. Now, this is my interpretation. I'm not sure what a Lojong master would say. So that you're you're really aware of what's coming in, right? That's what I said. What's coming in as opposed to who's receiving it and how it's being received. So that to me is the essence of that it's slogan number 2. The first, once again, were the preliminaries of see everything, see the preciousness of human life, see the impermanence of everything, the unsatisfactoriness of samsara, and the responsibility of karma. Just wanted to put that in so people will understand that there's a 1 before we get to 2. So so the first one is recognizing it in terms of practice on the cushion. And the second one, the 6th one, the last of the bodhicittas, is recognizing the same truth, but giving us a heads up, a little nudge that it doesn't disappear. It doesn't disappear when you're off the cushion, that there is, it's not like your Buddha nature takes a holiday when you're not meditating. So that's how I see it. I'm open to other views. Did it strike you in a particular way, Echo? Oh, okay.
Yes, I think it's very interesting to hear your child of illusion. Be a child of illusion. When we say child, there's an innocent aspect of being a child, almost like innocent in the sense they are not conditioned like adults, you know, through education, through the way other people told you, to how you think. Child just being a child, and illusion seems like very playful flavor in that. So I thought that is very interesting. Be a child of illusion, and it is also after meditation. After meditation, in other words, after meditation means when your body and mind more subtle, stable, and so you are in that condition. So now your body and mind it are in that condition to be actually a child of illusion. So I thought that phrase is very, very interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, what you said, I've read that in other commentary, and I neglected to say it. So thank you once again. Yes, one of the things that's emphasized in that particular slogan is this innocence of a child, the child that is that hasn't been conditioned, you know, by all of these things. And also, another thought I had about it is that you are still living in the world of illusions. Like I didn't tell this particular one the story of the Zen monk who is has been authenticated and affirmed in his seeing his nature at a certain point by his master, and there. This is in the edge of the jungle, and the student is walking down the path, and there is a tiger coming to him, and he thinks to himself, "Well, I'm enlightened." It's not, hasn't really seen everything, right? And so he keeps walking, and the tiger gobbles him up. So this other monks are really upset, and they ask the master what happened, and the master says he was an enlightened fool. He was enlightened, but the tiger wasn't. So we always have to remember this, and I alluded to that also when I talked about when you wake up from the dream. I didn't quite say it in these terms. Other people are still in their dreams, and you're still probably in your dream in a certain way. So there's a certain acknowledgement that you're living in the world of samsara, you're living in the world of illusion. But I think with this idea, really interesting, of being innocent within it, but being someone who can not have to be dictated to or overcome by their own habitual tendencies and vexations. So thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. It's really helpful.
I'm more concerned about the practical aspect of things.
Okay.
You just mentioned reaching a balance because I know in theory that we all have Buddha nature, but I have never seen it, and I just don't know what it is. And sometimes in my life, I try to follow the Buddhist teaching. And for example, when I see people in pain or people in need in general, I always have this first instinct of trying to help them. But it's just a fleeting moment. When I start to help them, maybe for the first 10 minutes or for the first $10, I feel good. And then afterwards, they ask me more and more. And I start to feel a bit uncomfortable. And some people just keep asking and keep asking. I know they're still in need, but I just feel that I don't want to help them anymore. I mean, I'm not there yet. And my therapist always told me, if you don't feel comfortable, you just don't do it. But I always thought that if I don't try to help them more, then I cannot really advance in the right direction. So how would you say I can?
Well,
strike
that's,
that
you're
balance?
bringing up very, very relevant things. So first, let me address the thing about Buddha nature. So as I often say, years and years ago, when I first heard the term Buddha nature, I mean, I didn't know what that meant, but given my issues of poor self-image, feelings of inadequacy, and so at least I said to myself, well, they're not saying that I'm chopped liver. I mean, it's whatever Buddha nature is, it certainly sounds better than saying you're a horrible person. So, I mean, I just on that level, I mean, not understanding it. The other thing is that not knowing what Buddha nature is really not a problem. It's part of the solution of looking in and finding out, you know, first of all, do you believe it on one level or another? And working towards that can help you work towards the very, very important thing of faith in the practice. Everything in your practice can be generated out of faith. And that's a lot better than just following like meditation things, going to retreats, finding that, oh, I'm getting a little bit better concentration here, I'm getting a little bit less involved there, and you're sort of continually kind of rating yourself. If you have this deep faith about Buddha nature, it's very helpful. And the fact that you don't have it, or the real fact is probably you don't have it in the way that you think, or you have it in a way that you haven't discovered, is part of practice. It's very natural that you can feel that way, but you can also really accept that feeling and not be thrown by it. So that's the first thing, that this is really natural. I mean, I don't even think, you know, in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha couldn't tell you what Buddha nature was. That's why he used skillful means. You know, he realized he couldn't actually tell people the exact truth because they couldn't hear it. And, you know, we can't hear a lot of things. So we have to understand things in the way that we can. You know, the Dalai Lama says, be a good person. You know, and, you know, whatever that might mean to you. I mean, I'm sure he could go into things in great detail, but that's kind of a simple way of understanding. And the second part of your question is something I think that everyone has to deal with, this idea of seeing suffering, feeling empathy, feeling guilt, feeling a desire to help people. And then recognizing, well, one thing I think that's really important to understand when you talk about compassion is that you have to understand what your resources are. And this is something in the domain, if you're interested in the 5 Buddha families, of Ratnasambhava. It's like the resources before you can make an intervention. So if you see 1,000 people that are hungry and you just have 1 candy bar, you really can't help them. That doesn't mean that you can't contact other people, that you can't do other things. there are always things that you can do, but then you get caught up in this thing I was alluding to earlier in my talk about, I have this intention, and I think this is really a wonderful intention to be a Buddha, to help other beings, right? And it's not working out. This is that, I have the best intentions in the world. I'm just doing everything right, and it's not unfolding the way I want to see it. And that's really getting caught up in a sense of self. So what you're feeling, you're not an insensitive person at all, and you're helping people, you're doing what you can. I don't have the answers for these kind of things. I think this is the kind of thing we really have to find out who you are and what you can do, and what are your greatest strengths. And it could be joining a food bank. It could be editing a newsletter to get people to do various things. It could be calling up a sick friend. Given how much you have in terms of your talents, your abilities, your wealth or your lack of wealth, whatever it is, these are things to really look at with a very gentle mind, right? With a mind that is at ease, looking back at really what's going on and what you can do. And also, the Dalai Lama talks about, at the end of the day, sort of thinking about what you've done, getting some sort of an assessment, not for recriminations, and it's also understanding the what's really behind repentance, right? Repentance in Buddhism is not supposed to be about just feeling guilty. It's about recognizing that you have done something or not done something in a particular way, that now that you're looking at it in this repentant mode, you realize that you can in the future do things differently. So that more of you is available to what you want to do. It's really something to be sorted out. I mean, you're not talking about things that are trivial. It's really, really important what you're bringing up. The solution is not so clear. I mean, the practical, what you're really talking about, how you really want to affect the world. It's something we're all dealing with. When we read about the horrible things going on in other countries, we really feel impotent, we feel powerless, but we're not powerless, right? We really can do a lot, but not what we'd like. We can't snap our fingers and stop conflicts 10,000 miles away from us. We can't do it. But I think it's really important to have a very deep understanding that if you can look at what's going on and you can develop a mind that is at ease, whatever it so happens that you do will just be much more helpful and much more effective than if you're caught up in self-recrimination and dilemmas and you feel like you can't act. That's, but I wrestle with this too. I mean, I think this is a really, really good question. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So this is Changhua. Because I'm not that familiar about the slogan things. There are many of them, right?
59.
59. Okay. So I just wonder that when we talk about Buddha nature, usually from the Mahayana tradition, including the Tibetan tradition, that we not just about liberation, like thinking of no thought, that kind of things. We also practice Bodhisattva path, helping others, that kind of things. So it's kind of like related to the previous questions that does the slogan talk about something about this, we call it wisdom, the function of Buddha nature, that when we encounter, even though you are enlightened, you still encounter those unenlightened beings. And we enter the dream, try to help others. How will that elaborate in those slogans?
Oh, well, so one of the things I said about bodhicitta, which maybe I danced around, I'm not sure, but as I said, it's kind of, it's not different from Buddha nature as I see it, but what the term kind of evokes or points to is not just the fact of our awakened minds, but also the path to the awakened mind and the aspiration to the awakened mind. That's all part of bodhicitta. And I think what you're asking about, Fasher, is something that really gets addressed in the rest of the slogans, because the all but these 5 really are about relative bodhicitta, living in the world, dealing with jealousy and anger and misinterpretation. Like number 52 is about all these ways that we can misinterpret what people say, what comes up in our minds, how we're more interested in attaining things than helping others, that we're continually misinterpreting the practice. So the other, and this is why I was drawn to it and why I think it's helpful for me and for lay practitioners, because many of us don't always have access to a teacher as much as we'd like, and we don't have access to retreats and intensive practice where many of these things might be dealt with in other ways. So what we're falling back on is, slogan. We have, someone who's never heard of Buddhism is filled with slogans like, do unto others as you would have others, do unto you, and don't cross the street in the middle of the road, and, make hay while the sun shines. We have millions of these slogans in our lives, but these are slogans that are based on bodhicitta, but they are slogans that are down in the trenches with us. With, for example, number 44, right, says that obstacles are liable to come up and you won't see them. That's the first part of it. The second part is when you're in an obstacle, it's hard to get out of it. And the third one is says when you're out of the obstacle, obstacles are going to come again, right? And Pema Chodron has her interpretation of that is that be aware of your own neuroses. This is the same slogan, right? Be aware of your, that's the first one. Second one is do something different, right? Just don't keep doing the same pattern that you're always doing, whatever it is, a relationship, a job, or whatever. And then bring up the aspiration to be free of this. That's how she does number 44. So you see, that's also what's very interesting about it, all these different angles. And then you see, as you work with them, what resonates with you. And hopefully the things that are going to resonate are the things where your real problems are, where you're really blind. And I think this spiritual blindness, spiritual bypass, spiritual materialism are really problems for us, because we don't want to deal with our problems. We want to watch Netflix and eat popcorn. That's nirvana for some people. It just doesn't last. And you heard it here first, right? You can only eat so much popcorn. And your subscription to Netflix could run out and you could die also. So it just is not a perfect solution. Okay.
be looking forward more of your talks.
Okay, thank you.
All right.